Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 610. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature our essay, An Agile Team in a Waterfall Company, Organizing Around the Product Flow. Focusing on getting features and support for a product to market changes how teams and groups organize to solve business problems. This is a standalone essay that can be read as part of a larger theme covering the trials faced by an Agile team in a Waterfall company. I'll be announcing where you can find that probably within the next 2 or 3 days when I open www.tomcagley.com up for business. Yes, the website is nearly here. Today, we also have a visit from Susan Parente with a discussion that I've named Agile or Traditional, pick one. Many organizations have to make accommodations for mandated classic project management approaches. Susan provides excellent advice on making these types of scenarios work. An Agile Team in a Waterfall Company Organizing Around the Product Flow by Thomas M. Cagley Jr., Megan E. Cagley. Helping an individual Agile team interface with a waterfall organization is only a stopgap measure. At some point, the level of noise and frustration generated between the team and the organization will wear everybody down. This will end up in a lose-lose outcome. Taking a 3-step approach outlined before today and in the earlier essays, prioritizing work entry, postponing commitment, addressing values and principles and behaviors, paves the way for change. To affect the direction of change and to deliver maximum value requires organizing people and teams around the flow of value in your organization. Modifying Steve Tendon and Daniel Durand's definition of flow a bit from their new book, Tame Your Workflow, which is being discussed on Reread Saturday. The amount of work or value delivered per unit of time. The definition provides a framework to consider throughput using a systems thinking perspective. Think big picture. Steve and Daniel define 4 types of flow: operational flow, financial flow, information flow, and psychological flow. Maximizing these 4 flows will deliver more value, but will require organizing around the operational flow. This is often the most contentious step in adopting Agile because most waterfall organizations group people based on specialty. Project managers in one group, coders in another, BAs and testers and security in other teams. There are all sorts of reasons for this approach to organizational design. The problem is that they cause workflow, prioritization, and contention issues. A value stream analysis provides the basis for organizing around the work. Value chain, a term coined by Michael Porter in 1985, takes a high-level view of how value is delivered by an organization, beginning with ideas and raw materials, entering the organization to the delivery of product or service to a customer. A value chain plots a departmental view of transformations and shows the supporting groups that enable the transformation. For example, a software firm decides on what software to build, creates software, markets and sells software, delivers that software, and then supports that software. These steps are the value chain. Human resources, facilities, community services are examples of support groups that support and enable the value chain, but are not central to the transformation and delivery of value. The 5 critical questions value chain analysis answer are: 1. What are your products and services? 2. How do products get to market? 3. Do all products follow the same product flow? 4. What are the most significant deviations in the flow of value to the market? 5. What should you measure to assess throughput and flow? Answering these questions, even at a macro level, gives the organization data that can be used to understand how to improve throughput and flow. One simple way to improve throughput is to reduce the amount of time work sits around waiting to be worked on. Handoffs classically generate stops and starts. Leveraging cross-functional teams with faster feedback loops is a great way to reduce waiting time and to improve informational flow. One simple discussion starter is to use visualization of the value chain with handoffs between functional silos identified. Ask whomever you're working with, even if it's only you, to help generate a list of suggestions for moving handoffs between the functional silos. The outcome is a list of possible changes to the organization that will increase the focus on flow and reduce the friction between the Agile team or teams and the rest of the organization. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. Susan Parente, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Susan, your Scrumdimentalist column challenges the boundaries. It upsets the people that think you can only do this stuff if you do it absolutely by the Scrumdimentalist manual. Susan, today, let's tackle traditional or agile. Pick one. Do you have to?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tom. Always asking good questions. Well, thank you for having me here again. And this is a wonderful topic. So I'm going to use an analogy here. I was at a car show this weekend with my dad. He has a 1927 Oldsmobile. I have a Mustang that's just a few years old. I love old cars. I love new cars. I love all cars. And at the show, you had to vote for your favorite car. And I said, what? How could I pick one? Because I love the oldest car on the lot, which was my dad's, and I love the newest car there, which was not mine. But who would want to pick one of these? It doesn't even make sense. And so this is what I see with traditional and agile. So there are aspects to the traditional and there are aspects of agile that are great. I don't want to pick one and force every project into one. First of all, we have two. So it's like our toolbox. We don't have just a hammer. We have a hammer and a screwdriver and a pair of pliers and maybe some other things. It depends on the work that we're doing. It depends on the project we're going to tackle, which tool we want to use. And on top of that, we have things like, well, I kind of need a hammer for this and I need pliers for that on the same project. So even on the same project, we may find traditional being needed for part of it and agile for another part. Now, you know those Scrumdimentalists are going to tell me you can't do that. And I say, I think you can do it, and you can do it well if you're being mindful about how you pick things instead of just picking things because it's easier. So you want to think about when you're using a hybrid solution, what aspect's traditional, what aspect is agile, and make sure that you're picking that with a good intention or an intention towards a particular result, not just to do the easy way out.
So tell me what a hybrid might look like. Give us a hybrid, and then let's just start there.
So one that I see often, especially in the federal government, is a traditional governance with an agile development approach. And the reason for this is that in the federal government, there's a lot of requirements for, especially in IT or software development projects, there's a lot of requirements for using traditional planning. There's certain artifacts that are required, things like a risk register or even a project management plan. And those are required as part of that IT project. They're congressionally mandated. So you're not going to easily get around that. So if you want to use Scrum, which is often the case with development wants to use Scrum, without that governance using a traditional methodology, they're never going to provide those artifacts that are congressionally mandated. And if you don't provide them, guess what? Congress doesn't give you money. So for federal organizations, having a traditional governance and an agile approach to development is really the only way they can implement Scrum. And so when people say, no, when you do Scrum, you got to get rid of everything, guess what? They're never going to be able to do it if you do that. And so you got to realize this environment doesn't allow for that. And how do we make it work?
So what would be an approach to making something like that work?
First of all, you have to look at what is the organizational structure. Are you dealing with a functional organization, a projectized organization, or somewhere in the middle, which would be a matrix organization? So how you're going to make that work is going to look different in each of those organizations. So an example I have, organization that I was supporting, was a weak matrix, which means it was a little bit more on the functional side. And what they did is they had a project manager who took care of the governance aspects of the project. And then they had a technical lead for that project who was responsible for the use of Scrum method for the approach that they used to develop for that project. So they kind of had two leads. This obviously can cause some challenges and can be difficult.
Sure.
But being aware of that and being in communication made sure that, the project management lead was making sure all of those fundamental documents that needed to be there were there. And the technical lead was able to rally their team and get them to do the development that was needed to move that project forward. And so where it worked well is when that project manager, or project, in this case, really a role of project coordinator, was able to work with the technical lead, and they could both support that project in being successful. So it is more complicated, but it was really the only way that organization was going to work because they're a weak matrix organization. So that there are challenges exist just even with that, because functionally the team lead or the technical lead was coming from the functional part of the organization, and the project management coordination was coming from the project management office. So it was a way that they could make that work and still meet the congressional mandates that they had and be able to have some, innovation and creativity inside of the team when developing to the project standards that were needed and implementing the product that the customer wanted, which, by the way, was changing on a, every few weeks or every month. There were a lot of changes to it. And part of that was because the product they were creating was integrating with other products. So the requirements were kind of never solid. Mm-hmm. So they had to do it that way to create a solution that worked in the end.
I buy the description for the federal sphere, maybe the state sphere, where there are legally mandated requirements. But then I run into scenarios where people have decided to hybridize Agile, and the daily stand-up now is a daily 1-hour status meeting where everyone, including the CIO, comes in and just really works the team over. So, and they view that as an acceptable hybrid because that's what's going to take to work there. I think there are areas where there probably people should not be allowed to hybridize.
When you were describing that scenario, the first word that came to mind was yuck.
Yeah.
And I figured you'd laugh at that. But so here's the problem with that. You're taking a tool and you're hybriding the tool, and I don't think that's what hybrid's about. Okay. So I think where I would draw that line is hybrid is you have some aspects that are done this way and you have some aspects that are done that way, but I would not take a tool and make it a traditional Agile tool because you're probably going to break it. It's either a tool is either meant to be traditional or meant to be Agile. So if you're writing a project management plan and you're doing Agile development, every part of your project management plan that you would normally have in a project management plan needs to be addressed. And inside of that, you would describe how you're going to do Agile. But you would not write a project management plan in an Agile way, because if you did, it wouldn't be done till the end of the project.
Oh, that ought to be amusing. Susan, if someone wanted to continue the conversation about hybridization and what the idea, and I really like the distinction that you made about the not hybridizing the tools versus or the techniques versus using and leveraging other things where you need those organizational interfaces, I think is probably something that sticks in my mind. How would they go about having that conversation?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente, and I lead a group there called Agile Risk Management, but you can also just go right to me, or you can email me at my email address is Parente, Parente, at S as in Sam, the number 3 hyphen TEC as in tech.com. So please find me in one of those places.
Super. And we will have all those contacts in the show notes. Susan, again, this is always a marvelous conversation. You've given me a lot to think about. I am a hybridizer, but I may have stepped over some of those bounds. So I have to go back and actually consider some of the things that I think about.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm always happy to challenge you because that's an incredible feat.
In Reread Saturday news, this week we tackle Chapter 7 and 8 of Tame, Your Workflow. These 2 chapters are a case study that knits together operational and financial throughput. Remember, buy your copy and support the authors and the blog and the podcast. If you use the link in the show notes. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 611, we will feature our interview with Jeff Smith. Jeff discussed his new book, Operations Anti-Patterns, DevOps Solutions. The conversation was the most clear-eyed and penetrating conversation on DevOps I've had on the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?